Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Today we have one of my very best friends, Jono Gardner, in the studio. Jono and I have known each other for a long time. He is I'm going to call him a famous developer in the Utah market. What he's done the last 10 years in growing his business and his real estate portfolio has really been amazing. So we've done a lot of business together. We've been friends. We've golfed together. And quite frankly, I don't know a more straightforward, authentic person than Jono. I've looked up to him for a long time. So I'm glad to talk here. He's a great family man. I know his entire family, all of his kids. So Jono, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You don't get to steal all of the limelight either, because I know Jono too.
Well, that's
I've worked
true.
with Jono, but I met him through you, Cory. So,
yeah. So
we're
Jono,
all friends.
I thought we might start, because you and I have had some discussions in the past about like how you were raised and things you learned from your mom and dad, and so I think maybe start there. Like, tell us a little bit about your early years and what kind of things you were taught, what kind of things you learned from your parents that you've carried on.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm the father of 5 children. I'm the oldest of 6 children. I grew up in Centerville, 15 minutes north of Salt Lake. It's interesting because now that I'm a 45-year-old dad and have 5 children, my oldest turned 17 yesterday. My youngest turned 8 today. And so you see a little bit of a microcosm of your own life as a young child through your own children. But growing up, I've in hindsight look back and think it was probably the ideal upbringing in a very, very safe neighborhood, away from a lot of money. Yet we never knew that we didn't have anything. But we always had our needs, and there was never a moment where I ever felt, as a child or a teenager, insecure about our surroundings. But as I look back, I can see where comments that my dad particularly had made to me, where I sensed that maybe he was a little more aware of the situation than I was. And that, I think, has kind of shaped a little bit of my perspective of trying to raise children today, in that I think that we had a very, very good upbringing. And I think a lot of that is because it was based more so on principles that, if we can get into this discussion, it could be considered eternal. They're not just temporary principles. These are eternal principles. And if you'll raise a family on those principles, which we probably will discuss, then I think that the children will appreciate and will ultimately, hopefully, grab onto those principles. And then it's kind of, you're on your own. You've taught them how to fish versus handing them the fish. So I look at my upbringing and think, well, it wasn't based on money. It was based on a lot of work. I remember my dad, when my brother Preston and I are 11 months apart. We're 11 months apart. We're probably 4 and 5 years old. And he had come home one time and said, "Hey boys, we're going out to Magna and we're going to pick up trash at a commercial retail center." Oh, okay. Great. I don't even know what that means. So we jumped into a diesel Volkswagen Rabbit and drove what felt like an hour to the west side of Magna and began to pick up trash in what was cold weather, and putting our hands into these, awful green bushes and picking up just junk. And I thought after about 15, 20 minutes, well, this isn't any fun. I don't want to do this anymore. But, we went out there, and my dad kind of said to us boys, "Hey, we're not finished until we're finished." And an hour later, we're still going. Well, experiences like that, we had experiences like that all the time. We were going out to Magna once a week to pick up trash. I don't think my dad was doing it as a means to teach the boys how to work. He was doing it because he needed some extra money. And how was he going to build a basketball court in the backyard for his 2 boys that were coming up if he didn't have the dollars to do so? So again, we had our needs, but some of the wants were never really in the cards. Well, experiences like that, or doing demolition all through junior high and high school, he had us working. Again, I don't think that it was his first choice to have the boys working on weekend nights or through the summers until the wee hours of the morning, doing things like ripping down walls and then chipping out concrete, masticow. I mean, it was tough work, but it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to us, because in those moments of being in the high school years, you start to realize, I don't want to work like this. I don't like this. I'm not going to work like this as I get older. And so you start to really have a wonderful appreciation of work. You also had a great appreciation of education, and our parents were quite strict on education, but in a much different way than maybe today. I don't ever remember being told that at some point I had to take the ACT. No one ever told me that that was going to be a precursor to getting into college. I don't remember hearing a lot of things. I didn't ever feel the pressure of trying to get straight A's, but I knew that it was important. It was something that was always talked about. And so through my schooling, I knew that I had to do well in school. Now, some of that may have been on my own, but these were just incredible, what I'll call principles, whether it was hard work. My parents taught me to be, you used a word, and I appreciate you saying that. I don't know if it's completely true, but to be authentic. And that regardless of where you are, to just be genuinely honest. I'd like to think that that's an attribute that can be carried on generationally. So I think, in short, my parents taught us how to work. They taught us the importance of education. They taught us that it's so important to be honest. And it's interesting because now in our home, as we are raising this young family, there are 3 principles that we teach over and over as they go out the door and go to school. We say to the children, okay, what are the 3 things that are most important today? Number 1, to be kind. 2, be honest. And 3, do the best that you can in everything that you're doing. If you can do those 3 things, then I think there's a place for you in this world. You may not make the most money. You may not be the most successful on the basketball court, but you'll be successful in life. And I think that was garnered from the days of being brought up from my parents.
So I was going to ask the 3 principles, and you just gave them to us. So talk to us about somebody in your life who, besides those that you've mentioned, exemplified kindness and how they taught that to you.
The first person that comes to mind is, because I'm sitting here in this particular office, is a good friend of Cory and mine, who at a very vulnerable point in my life, he gave me more confidence than almost anyone to that date. Cory and I had started a business together called Entrada Capital Partners. And of all of the years to start the business, we decided that 2009 would be a wonderful year to start. This individual is Jack Livingood, who, from my perspective, had everything that he needed to be successful. He had a great company. He had a good demeanor. He was always very honest with us. And he'd said to Cory and I, he got a blank sheet of paper. I think he called it a blue sky moment. Do you remember that?
Yeah, totally.
And in the year 2009, there is no capital markets. There's no debt markets. There is virtually no real estate markets. There was no private equity markets. And I'm out there trying to figure out what we can do. There clearly were opportunities, but there was no way to actually effectuate the opportunity. And I just remember that Big D was going through this process where they were letting people go. And over a period of 12 months, I think they'd let 300 people go because the work was it was diminishing. And then there were rumors that would go around the Big D office, because this is where we shared an office, that well, when's Jono going to do something? When is Jono going to actually show that he's worthwhile? And I'd get people that come into the office and say, hey, I just got out of a meeting and I heard that, so-and-so was talking about you. What were they saying? I wonder when you're going to actually turn a profit. Really? So I would go home at night and I would have these thoughts in my head about I had left a family business where they had been very successful, and there was a wonderful ladder that I could have stayed on and done very well there. And now I'm going home at night saying to my wife, I don't know how much longer this is going to last. We're in a very, very bad recession. And, I'm hearing rumors in the office. They're wondering when I'm going to turn a profit. Well, I'm not going to turn a profit for a long time. These projects are going to take a while. And I started kind of feeling, I don't know if I felt down, but I started really questioning about what was my future. And it finally got to me, and I was talking to Cory, and Cory, you knew what I was feeling. And Cory kept confirming that, no, everything's going to be fine. But I finally, when Jack Livingood came into the office one day, I said, hey, Jack, can I talk to you? Look, I'm not a trust fund baby. And I work for everything that I have, and I've got a mortgage, and I have car payments, and I just need to know if you're not feeling comfortable with what we're doing, then I'd prefer you to let me know sooner rather than later. I'd need to kind of be prepared to go find something new. And he looked at me with this most bewildered look, almost like, where did that come from? What are you talking about? And he looked at me and he said, I am as patient as a clam. You don't need to worry about anything. I know what you're doing, and it's going to take time, and I'm your biggest believer. And I walked out of that office like I was 6'8", 300 pounds of just pure muscle. And I thought, this guy gave me all the confidence in the world to go make a difference. And honestly, I think had he responded differently, Cory, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. I don't know. It would have been I think that we could have still been successful in a lot of things, but it gave me the confidence to stay with it. And it wasn't long after that conversation that we landed one of the biggest real estate jobs in the state of Utah. And that served as a catalyst for, I look back, it really served a catalyst for the last 100 projects that we've done.
Yeah, I remember that pretty well. And I think I was calmer because I knew Jack so well. Like I had been in business with him for so long, because he's that guy, right? He's the guy he's got your back, and he is patient, and he is the guy who thinks the pie can get bigger. And I just inherently, I knew him a lot better. And I think Jono was a little nervous until that day. And Jono made a lot of money for the company after that. So for those listening that wondered if that ever happened, it happened in spades. But
that was a good deal.
That was fun.
But in follow up to that story, here's what I like most about it. I don't think that was a big deal to Jack. And yet it was one of the bigger deals in my life. I saw Jack at a lunch about a year ago, all by himself, eating there. And I'm sitting there with a few guys at the table. And I looked across the room, and there's Jack sitting all by himself at this table. Just a rush of positivity kind of comes right into me. It's as if kind of like the Lord is saying, that guy made a difference in your life. Why don't you go talk to him? Right? I didn't really need anyone to tell me, but when I looked at him, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I walked over there. I said, hey, Jack, I haven't seen you for a while. And just as nice as could be, oh, Jono, hey, take a seat. It's great to see you. I said, Jack, I got to tell you something. I've worked with a lot of people in my life. I've been around a lot of good people. I've been around some bad people. You're at the top of my list. Oh, well, that's nice of you to say. He had no idea. I said, no, Jack, I want to tell you this story. And then I told him the story. And he looked at me and kind of smiled and said, I don't really remember that, but that's nice. And I think I kind of like that because it was very authentic. Mm-hmm. He wasn't grandstanding for me. He wasn't trying to make a big point like, hey, I'm here for you. I'm going to be the hero for you. There was none of that. Jack was so authentic and so real and gave me so much confidence. And at the time, Cory, we were what, 20? No, we were probably 30, 32.
Early 30s, probably.
Early 30s.
Yeah.
Right. So a fairly vulnerable time period. And I look back, I mean, I had a good education. I had some good work experience. I would have landed on my feet somewhere, but
You think?
I'd like to think that was a tremendous moment in my life where someone just gave me a shot of adrenaline, of testosterone, and of confidence. You're going to be just fine.
The takeaway for me on that is same conversation can mean two different things to two different people.
Yeah.
And the second thing I take away from that is for anybody listening, think back in your own life at people who've made a difference for you at moments that were critical like that when Jack did that for you, and approach them and with gratitude tell them what that meant to your life and how that changed. I can think back in my life and there are certain people that I can attribute success to. I met one of them in Las Vegas this last week. He made a referral that changed my business forever. And we hadn't seen each other for probably 5 or 6 years. He walks up and we see each other in Las Vegas. And I said, Dave, do you know what you did for me back in 2015? And he said, what? And I said, you gave me this referral that led to a massive growth in my business, a massive boost in my confidence of being able to do what I do. And he said, I had no idea. So I think those conversations, but he was very grateful that I had, brought it up. Let's look back at our own lives and say, who are the people that may not know the difference that they made in our life, and make sure that they know about that. I think that's a great takeaway.
Holidays is a good time to do that.
Well, let's talk about one other. And I genuinely mean this. And if I was on a different podcast, I'd still say the same thing. But in 2009, someone approaches me and says, hey, what do you think about breaking out and starting up more of a capital and development company? Now, I was at a very successful family-run development company, doing just fine. And when I first heard that, it was a little bit of, what are you thinking? Well, I think there's some great opportunities out there. What do you think about breaking away? And there could be a great opportunity, right? And you know who I'm talking about, and Cory knows who I'm talking about because it's Cory.
It's Cory, yeah.
Now, these are people that see things and then go react on it. Now, when I think of Jack and having that conversation, of course, Jack doesn't remember because it wasn't as big of a deal. He wasn't trying to get rid of me. He wasn't trying to end the show, but I felt that something was different. When Cory came to me, I didn't fully understand what it was that he was trying to do. He had a vision for a number of years wanting to start a business that was a little more diverse. That conversation completely changed my life. I really wonder where things would have gone. Now,
if we had just started 5 years later, you'd still be here.
I know. I think of Cory and I have been friends for a long time. We're similar. We graduated in 1995 from high school. We went on missions the same time. We went through college the same time. We've lived a kind of a parallel life with a lot of things. But when we came together to start this business, it wasn't a business relationship. It was two guys that were best friends. And that has meant the absolute world to me because I look back and see a little bit of what happened starting in 2009 and how the world suddenly changed. I mean, I can walk you through every single year from 2009 all the way to the present of how it got bigger and better every single year. Well, if you want to talk about someone that helped change my life, it was Cory Moore in a lot of ways, but
at least changed direction, at least changed.
But the confidence that he had in me, wherever he went, would introduce me as his smartest friend. Well, come on. I'm not his smartest friend, but he knew.
I think he is actually.
Sorry, everyone else.
That's not true. That's not true. But you were so kind to me and always expressed so much confidence. In fact, if you ask my wife, well, what do you think of Cory Moore? She's going to say, he might be one of the kindest friends that you have. Oh, birthdays he remembers. Christmas time he remembers, little notes that he remembers. It's quite a quality that you have, Cory.
Oh, you're kind.
And this podcast probably, as the host, you probably didn't want it about you, but your best buddies here. And I
was going to give him crap about driving to Costco, and now I feel like I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. I still do that.
I'm
Where do
sure
you think I just filled up the diesel Jeep? Costco. I'm not ashamed. But anyway, Cory, thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
We have had so much fun together.
That means
going back so many years.
You do have, though, these really good qualities about you. And when you go back to the idea of principles, you're always very honest and straightforward with people. I think the things that you're teaching your kids, they're coming from what you do in your own life. But you're also, you do really well. And the whole Costco comment is like, we were going somewhere. It was like, a 5-mile drive, but we drove a mile to get cheaper gas at Costco. And I kept asking Jono, where are you going? We just passed 20 gas stations on the way to Costco. Well, Costco's less. I said, yeah, but you spent that money driving all the way to Costco. But I don't mean to make light of that. I actually think that's it's not like you haven't done well in life, but you still are trying to get the cheaper gas. And you talked about hard work. So being frugal and hard work, those are two things I believe are very important, but I also believe they're hard to teach our kids. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm still trying to figure it out. My children are not growing up in the same home that I grew up in terms of economics. And there is a balancing act that has to exist, because it's not wrong that money may have an influence in your life. I look at my children, and clearly they may view the world a little differently than when I was their age. I don't know entirely how to keep a child grounded if they're living in a sphere of influence. For example, I think that money can potentially wreck a family if the children are not taught, some form of gratitude. But the moment that they have certain expectations or a sense of entitlement, it's almost over. And the entitlement can ruin the child's life. So I've told my two boys, and I use them as an example because they're the two oldest. Boys, I'm not going to be there when you graduate from high school. You need to figure out how you're going to get into college, and you need to figure out where your first job's going to come from, because you're not working for me. And they know that. They know they're not coming to work for me when they graduate. They need to be able to have enough experience and education on their own that if the stars line up, then I'd love to have them come back. Nothing would make me more happy to work with any of my children. I mean, how much fun would that be? You look at Roger Boyer, right? Local guy in the Salt Lake market. He's having the time of his life because he gets to work with his two boys. And, he's got all these other daughters, and they're involved, maybe a little less direct, but I mean, what a great example of someone that has taught his family well. But I look at my children and think, we do great things. We're going to Africa on the 21st because I couldn't think of one thing that these children needed for Christmas. Really, am I going to go out there and buy a bunch of junk so that they can wake up Christmas morning and open up stuff they don't really need? And so we talked, Elisa and I talked, and we said, why don't we go out of town? So now,
out of town in Africa or at different.
This is a little bit of
at my house, yeah.
But this is a little bit of maybe that
right,
a sense of irony in that. Okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to travel halfway across the world on a trip that they have no idea how much it costs, and I'm taking my two parents, my mom and dad, and I'm going to spend a lot of money on the trip because I didn't want this kind of material we just have too much of it. So I want to go spend quality time where we're going to go on a 10-day safari.
I think that's great.
The bottom line is, guys, I don't know the magic pill, and I think everyone is still trying to figure it out. But I know that a child needs to know how to work. They've got to appreciate education, and they have to learn how to be kind. And if they can't do that, whether they have money or not, it's going to be a tough life.
Jono, if you need to take a minute and think about this question, that's fine. But if you look back on either a turning point or a critical moment in your journey as a father, can you tell us about that moment and what it taught you?
I had spent a lot of time with a number of other youth that were not my own, whether it was in youth activities or in a church setting, where I was constantly teaching someone else's children, and always had good rapport and a good relationship with whether a young man or a young woman. And found that, I really liked being around the youth, and I felt like I could make a difference. And as you start having children, our first child was born in New York, and we ultimately elected to move from New York because it probably wasn't the most perfect area to raise a child. And so we ended up coming back to Salt Lake. As they're young, your problems are tiresome, but they're temporary. And then you notice as they get older that things become a little more difficult. So the turning point for me, and I don't know the exact time period, but I do remember, if I look back, it was when suddenly my children wanted to be more independent. And it's kind of like, almost like I didn't exist in the home anymore. Right? I'm still battling this, by the way.
Yeah.
Who are you? Where'd you come from? What are you doing eating our cereal? Well, I live here. I'm your dad. What are you talking about? When they suddenly kind of don't see the world the way you see it, and yet they've got this very defined opinion. It's like, where did they get that opinion? How can they think that way? That's not the way I think. That was a moment where it was like, wait a minute. This boy or this girl is suddenly becoming their own. And they have a right to have their own opinion. And in a way, I've got to be maybe a little more respectful that maybe they see it differently than I do. Or maybe they see it differently than their mom does. I didn't like that moment, by the way.
Yeah.
I still don't like that moment. But it's a hard thing when you're raising 5 children and you kind of become almost a spectator in the home because they've already got it all figured out. They don't need, what do they need dad for? You're the guy that gets up in the morning and goes to some place we don't know and then comes back at night and says you're going to another place that we see on Sundays. Who are you to tell me what to do? That's a hard thing. And that's been a bit of a turning moment for me in that, okay, my relationship with my children cannot be as a dictator. I struggle with this. And I think a lot of dads do.
Yeah.
It can't be that I just tell them what to do. I'm trying to find the balance that I can be their friend, but I can also be their dad.
That is a hard balance. I think we all deal with that.
Everybody sitting around this table is dealing with that with their kids right now. You know, especially our oldest, they're kind of all the same age. When you see they, start to get their own, even like their own politics and stuff like that, that they see things differently than you see them, and wish that they would see them, and you just have to love them no matter what. And that unconditional love is really the most important message that they can get from us. Is it doesn't matter what you do, what you think, what you say, or how you treat me. I still love you, and you're still my kid. And you'll probably grow out of some of these things as you get older and realize what adulthood is like, and that's fine because you've got to learn it.
Jono, you mentioned working with the youth and people in your neighborhood and church and things like that, in addition to your own kids. And I think you might have a pretty good perspective on what are some of the problems that are facing our children, right? What have you seen that is, hurting the next generation? Or what do you think parents should be watching out for with their kids, right? Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah. And this is something that I've given a lot of thought to. I think a lot of people have tried to think through this. I think that one of the concerns that I have for maybe the younger generation or generations is this sense of instant gratification. They've grown up in a world where everything or anything was almost instantaneously brought to you. For example, If you didn't know the answer to a science question, you can punch it into a Google search, and within 1 second, 35,000 answers are there for you. Well, we didn't have that growing up. If we wanted to look for something, we went to the library, we went to the encyclopedias, or we had to sit down with someone that was well-versed and say, here's my question, and you'd have to talk through it. But the youth of today are getting answers almost immediately with very little effort, meaning not much work. Well, I think that's problematic. There's also there's certain greatness about our technology today, and I'm not wanting to push it away, but I think we have to be careful with how we teach our children. The concept of faith, regardless of being religious or not, the concept of faith is dying. Somehow it's even being looked down upon as being lesser than or being considered weak. Where is the weakness in looking at potentially setting a goal and having the faith that you can actually achieve the goal? Now, remember, a goal to me is something that is almost beyond your reach, right? A goal of waking up in the morning and saying I'm going to work in a full day of work. Well, that shouldn't be a goal. That's an expectation. But we need to set goals that are going to push us and will require, a 5-letter word? Require a little bit of faith. Well, it's hard to have faith when you're not used to working for anything. So when troubles come and there's not much of a foundation there, well, it gets washed away very quickly. And then they become very discouraged. And there's forms of depression that we've never seen before. We see more children with depression today. And, well, why is it? Well, I think a lot of it has to come with anything they need is often granted to them very quickly. Parents can be guilty of this. I'm sure I've been guilty of this with my own children in providing them things that maybe they should have spent a little more time thinking through or working for. And so I think we have to be careful with our children, the youth that we work with and that we are there to teach them that there's nothing wrong with this concept of not knowing, having a little bit of faith, believing in yourself, believing that you can get there, and then putting your head down and going to work and achieving that. If we can do that to give people this ability that faith is real, it is a real principle, then I believe that these youth are going to be just fine. In fact, I think they're more prepared than any other generation that we've ever seen. But they're also at a very pivotal part in their life where if everything's just given to them, then when the rains come, it's almost like a complete disaster.
I can see that happening in so many children's lives that I know. I almost wish that my kids could go back and grow up the way I grew up, and I'm sure that my parents thought the same thing about me as they were raising me.
I think they did.
And they'll think the same way about their kids someday. Like, oh, I remember when you had to carry around a phone to find an answer, and I had to type it in. Right. That's going to be the podcast in 30 years. You have probably certain mentors in your life that have exhibited specific qualities. Are the 3 things that you talked to us about today, are those derived from those people? And if so, can you tell us some experiences that you've had where those things have made themselves manifest? Yeah.
Either you're really insightful or I'm just, I've missed this connection, but you're spot on. Yes. My mom and my dad have been examples of those 3 principles my entire life. If you were to look at my dad today and you were to meet him and not know that he was my dad, so you had no connection to him, I promise you that within 5 or 10 minutes of walking away, you'd say, that was a very kind individual. That was a good man. And you would have to say, right to his core, that's a good man. If you met my mom, now I said 5 to 10 minutes with my dad. If you met my mom, within 30 seconds, she will have asked you 35 questions, and you would have only been able to answer one or two because she's still asking you questions. And you would say, that's the kindest woman I've been around. She was so interested in me. Wherever my parents go, they are infectious. They're almost and contagious because people walk away wanting to be better people. Now, here's something, and this is, speaking of honesty, this is a true statement. I've never seen my dad lie. Ever. I've only seen him be honest. I've never seen in any situation. Now, granted, growing up, maybe there were things that were said that I just didn't know the difference. But I'm old enough now, and I've been around him enough that this is one of the greatest qualities that you could ever put into an individual. And he happens to be my dad. I've never seen him lie. Now, on a golf course, did he think he hit it a little farther than he really did? Did he claim that, he would have birdied that, but, someone was walking in his backswing? There may have been things. But I'm talking about real life situations that really matter. I've never seen my dad lie. Here's another great quality that I think it must exist in everyone, and that is you have to be fair. Now, we all come from different what we call socioeconomic statuses. And if you get to a point and you're hanging around, both of you are hanging around, very successful people, do you treat those people different than you would treat someone that might be working at a retail or fast food or something that you might consider a different economic status than maybe the CEO that you've been working with? I think if you're treating them differently, then we need some introspection into our life. And I think about this a lot. And it's something that, Cory, you and I have talked about a lot. I've shifted a little bit. I used to say, you can't be a man of circumstance. Regardless of where you are, you should have a very, very similar stance. Now, the reason that I've shifted is that I have found that depending on who I'm interacting with, I kind of shape myself to that person. But you can never treat that individual as if they're either better than you or they're less than you, right? It goes both ways. You don't want to give someone so much credence that you're gloating on them. And at the same time, you'd never treat someone like they're less than you. And I've had some very powerful personal experiences where I've witnessed the way people get treated, and it's been emblazoned in me. Never will I act like that. I've given many church talks about John chapter 8, where the woman who was caught in the very act was taken before the Savior, and he looks at her. He knows what's happened. He's driven off, the men that have brought her to him. In my world, there's no one greater than the Savior. He's God. And here is a woman who, in the Jewish law, has now committed one of the most heinous crimes of all, or sins. She should be stoned. But the greatest individual, a God, looks at her and says, "Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee?" Now think of the implication behind that. I'm not here to condemn you. And he states it. And she says, "No man, Lord, where are they? They're not here. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." That's the example in my life of what I want to be. That regardless of where I am, I can stand up for truth. I can stand up for principles. I can stand up for myself. But you better be fair. And you better treat people like you want them to treat you. I'm sure that I've been guilty of not doing this in the past. But I think about it every single day that I wake up. I want to be the individual that treats someone with pure fairness.
That's good stuff.
I think you need to add a
You want me
number
to say
4.
amen?
No, I think you need to add a number 4 to the list, because there was 3. I think, be fair, should be number 4.
It's kind of part of kindness, but
sure,
it is different.
Sure,
it is different.
When I think of Jono, I think of someone who's all the things he said. He's very kind and he's very thoughtful and he does treat everyone the same, and yet he's very self-confident. And balancing those two can be hard, right? You're very successful, but I think hats off that you do have self-confidence, and in many times, because let me tell you, he is often the smartest guy in the room, but many times I've seen him where he's in some ways running circles around the conversation in a business setting, but he stops. Do you understand? He treats people with respect. If they don't understand, he repeats himself. Hats off to him because he does act in that way. And I would call Jono a gentleman, which is the question I'm going to ask, and we ask all of our guests at the end of the podcast, and that is, when you hear gentleman or be a gentleman, what does it mean to you, Jono? How would you explain being a gentleman to those that are listening?
Here's the first thing that comes to my mind is that a gentleman is an individual that's willing to put the interest of others in front of their own. And I do think that's a hard thing to do, because we are so busy and so driven that the way that I get from A to B is not through C. I go A to B, and when C somehow interjects, it can be a bit of a distraction. And, when you're laser focused, I kind of just want to push distractions to the side. And by the way, again, I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty of knowing where I want to go and finding the direct route to get there. But a true gentleman is someone that will find the interest of others and place them in front of their own. If you can do that, which is this ability to slow down. Sissel, is that a name you've heard before?
Yeah.
She's a Norwegian singer. She may be an angel. I think she's probably a legitimate angel. I don't think she's human, because when she sings, it's a piercing feeling right to your heart. You can't help but know that God exists. Well, she sings this song that's titled "Slow Down." Slow down so that you know that God is there. Well, the problem that a lot of us have, and a lot of people that have seen success or are really driven, is that we can be a little self-centered and we think our way is the right way. And I think when you slow down and you take a step outside of your own boundaries, you find out that maybe your way wasn't the only way. And maybe your buddy who has a different opinion, maybe he's got some merit to what you're talking about. And then we find out that our differences maybe aren't as great as we thought, that we are more alike than we are different. And that comes because you're willing to put the interest of others in front of your own.
And that applies to parenting. That applies to business.
It's harder in parenting.
Applies to marriage.
It applies to marriage. Yeah. I've learned a lot in marriage. We didn't talk about that, but yes, it applies in marriage.
I've thought about this a lot, actually, because I get on that same focused, I'm going to get this done at all costs, right? Like, I'm going to make this happen. That works when you're on a task list or you're trying to get something done that you control. But as soon as you insert anybody, any other people,
any type of
whether they're your
humanity,
kids, your wife, your business partners, your customers, you name it, it can't be I will make it happen. It now has to be what Jono said, a slow down, a ask questions, a make sure we're all on the same page, a sharing of vision, a sharing of we can get there, a offering of faith with each other, right, in order to get there. But it is easy to get on that track of I'm going to make this get done. Well, you can't do that with people. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
When I was in the mission field serving in New York City, I was asked by the mission president, and at the time I was his assistant, to go to this small island of Bermuda and to see how the missionaries were doing. Without getting into the details, I went over there, spent a week there, and then came back. And the mission president says, I need you to go to this zone conference. We're going to talk with all the zone leaders. We're going to break them away. And I want you to really get after them. We expect more out of these zone leaders. And I need you to be the leader as basically my advocate, I need you to go let him have it. Now, I'm 20 years old at the time, 19 or 20, and my mission president was a super good man. I think of the world of him today. But he sent me on a mission like a missile into a room that's going to blow up. And it did blow up because I walked in there, and here are these good missionaries that are working hard, that are trying to do their best. And then I criticize them, right? Their peer criticizes them and tells them, we got to do better, and you're not doing this, and you're not doing that. And I remember making a statement, I didn't come out on the mission to make friends. Wow. That couldn't be more false. That's that may be one of the worst things I've ever said in my life. I didn't come out on the mission to make friends. And when I said it, it was like I couldn't grab those words and bring them back in fast enough because I was trying to make this point to these elders that, hey, we're here to do the work. I didn't come out here to make friends. Bad choice of words. I walked out of that room feeling like I was a foot tall. I knew that I had just made a fool of myself. I didn't represent the president that well. And I really regretted the way that it came across. Now, looking back, that's been a very good moment in my life to remember that that's not who I am, right? That's not a gentleman. A gentleman doesn't walk in and criticize others. A gentleman figures out how to walk in and how to lift everyone, right? Doesn't mean you can't speak the truth, but how are you going to lift everyone in that room? I failed in that opportunity.
Well, you remembered it.
Yeah.
Right. And we learn by our failures. Those failures are just opportunities. Amazing podcast today.
Yeah, off the chain.
I loved it.
You did great.
Thank you for all of our listeners. Thank you to Jono for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time that you've taken away from your business and your family to be here with us. If you liked this podcast, please share it with somebody that you love. Hop over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast and give us a rating and a review. We'd love that. That would be a great service to us and helps us reach more people and get more people in touch with good content that hopefully inspires them to be a better person. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Be a gentleman, everyone.